Welcome to the second exploration of David Holmgren's Principles of Permaculture here on the Permaculture Podcast. Let me get a couple things set up here. Trying things a little differently today with my behind the scenes setup. There, let's go with that. So then, today is going to continue the exploration of David Holmgren's Principles of Permaculture with 4, 5, and 6. Apply self-regulation and accept feedback, use and value renewable resources and services, and produce no waste. Plus, along the way, if you'd like me to look at answering any questions that you have, feel free to drop them in the chat as we roll along. Although the video in this series, all 4 of them, where do I want myself today? Will cover all 12 of David's principles. I'll give you an introduction to each of these throughout this series, but if you'd like to, with a focus on the landscape, our lives, and communities, and also about what we can do to teach these ideas to future generations. If you'd like to learn more about these ideas directly from the co-originator of permaculture who developed these principles, you can pick up a copy of Permaculture Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability from the Permaculture Principles web store. If you're in the US, that should be us.permacultureprinciples.com. If you're in Australia, then it's au.permacultureprinciples.com. And if you've never been there before, I also recommend visiting permacultureprinciples.com to take a look. There are numerous examples of all the principles beyond what I'll be covering today, and it's with their permission that I include some of the graphics that you saw in the header for this video and you'll see throughout the day, as well as what you'll see in David's book. So let's go ahead and dive in here with Principle 4, which is apply self-regulation and accept feedback. For me, this is a principle that is an ongoing process of reflection and refinement, and it's a great reason to keep a journal. I've got, stacks of these composition notebooks sitting around that I put as much information as I can into as I work throughout the day, just so that I can track all of this information and reflect back on it later for consideration. And so that I don't have to rely on my very imperfect human memory to do so. That having it in print just makes it super useful to refer back to. When I'm putting together things like the graphics that you see for in these videos or for the covers to episodes of the podcast, I've got a bunch of templates that I put together that are kind of standardized, but then in my notebooks I have information about like what size should a particular graphic be, and then like where are the XY coordinates when I put it into Photoshop, so that it all comes together pretty quickly. And then from notes like that I can develop a variety of different reference sheets and instructions that makes this work easier to replicate over time. And it's similar with like my client interviews, or when I sit down with someone for a consultation or meandering, is to have in that conversation, if there's something that is particularly insightful for them or is useful, that I'll write that down during or after the appointment, and then that goes into my toolkit. And so writing all of these things down are really helpful as not only in our day-to-day practices, but also in our like professional work as well, to pull these kinds of ideas into one place. And then when we know what's working, being able to go back and see what did we do to get here, how can we continue to kind of tweak this over time. And that's similar, I think, to what we want to do in the landscape as well, that we can track what we've planted and what's growing in the garden, see what survives, what does well in a particular year, and then if we have a bounty, we can look at the possibilities for why. And if it's a huge bounty, maybe we consider the next year planting a little less so that we have only just what we need. If a plant becomes sick or diseased in some way, being able to write down what were the symptoms, what were the signs, and that gives us an ability then to kind of like read our garden and our plants and refine our knowledge and experience over time going forward, to be able to respond to those issues ideally in kind of a proactive way, and so that we have less to worry about as we're working through our garden and our landscape or whatever it is that we're working on. Similarly, if you were living in an area that's prone to disasters of some kind, that just knowing that information allows us to put plans together and prepare. But then if a disaster does strike, we can look at what actively happened and see, if there's flooding, where did the water flow? If it's if that's flooding from a stream, where did the stream break its banks? If it's flooding in an urban environment, what streets flooded? And if we needed to, travel out in an emergency, which way would we go? And that not only is this feedback that we're accepting through the process of self-regulation, what we might, arrive at from our own reflection by looking at what it is that we're doing or what someone else might share with us, but the signs of what are going on in the world around us are also some of the feedback that we can pay attention to. And then that self-regulation is taking all of that in and working with it in a way that is productive for ourselves and the lives that we want to live. And thinking about our lives, if we are in a place and we feel uncomfortable about something, checking in and asking why. See if we can figure those kinds of things out. And if we don't find a clear answer, with personal reflection, to reach out to trusted friends or family that know us well and ask for their insights. What they provide back may be useful to us in our sense of, personal development and growth. That idea that the work that we're doing is from the inside out, and then allows us to work from our strengths as we move through these processes. And I think having a clear idea of what our strengths and weaknesses are, those things that we find easy and are called to versus those that are less comfortable, it's really important to have an idea of that, because that's what we can be working towards. And I don't like to necessarily try to overcome things that we might perceive as weaknesses, but instead try to work towards those pieces that are our strengths so that they make up more of our lives over time. But then, in our communities, I see the importance of being engaged and part of the cycle of regulation and feedback. If we're inclined to be politically active, our presence in the process helps to regulate the actions of government and provide feedback on the processes. If we're members of organizations, to attend meetings or reach out to members and express our interests in, things going in a particular direction or a concern that we might have. If we attend a conference or convergence every year that we really enjoy, and there's a speaker that we think would be a great fit, helping the organizers learn about that person and get in touch with them. And then, ask them for feedback as well if we're working with someone, and really get into being a part of an organization. What can we do to help our community or organization or situation in some way? And there's kind of a breadth of possibilities in that way, and someone may invite us in deeper or may ask us not to participate, and whatever arises, being in a place where we're okay with that and doing the best we can to, be a productive, I don't really like the language of productivity sometimes because of what that dives into, but being a part of this process in everything that we're doing, not just the landscape, not just our moment-to-moment permaculture practices, but looking at the way that we can apply these ideas to everything that it is that we do. I mean, it's one of the things that's super important for me is with the podcast, I'm always looking for your feedback, insights, or suggestions, whether that's a question that you want answered on air, something that we can talk about together to work on resolving something, or somebody you'd like as a guest or something to cover in one of these live streams. I think that kind of information is always valuable. And if we can find the ways that we can communicate these ideas well, in the way that someone is open to receiving them, then it's beneficial to everybody. And that's where I think that can be applied across the board, but especially to young people, is to listen. There's that idea, it was super popular in the 90s. I don't know if it still is anymore. Stephen Covey's like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Um, but one of the things that he presented was this idea that we should seek first to understand and then to be understood. And that, we listen, we ask clarifying questions and try to really understand the people who we're engaged with. And yeah, I just find that that's super important in all of this work, in getting the plants in the ground, in helping people make the transitions that they're interested in their lives, diving more deeply into permaculture practices. All of it comes together in this way of, communicating. And that I see that a lot of our struggles that we run into and a lot of friction is very often a result of just a miscommunication. Very rarely is it, and we do have cases where people just absolutely don't like each other and, are each other's worst enemies, or someone may act out of spite for some reason or some other emotion. But generally speaking, a lot of stuff is just miscommunicating. And so listening, asking questions, lets us dive into that deeper and again continue to apply this idea of self-regulation and feedback and accepting feedback. And so to take that further, as I mentioned children, I like to think about, if my children and I have a really good day, asking them what made it awesome. Why did they really enjoy it? And what can we do to have that kind of experience again? Not necessarily trying to recreate it exactly, because, we can't always trap that kind of magic twice. But what about that was a great experience? And then looking for ways that we can, recreate that in the future. If something doesn't turn out as expected or in a way that we don't want to repeat, asking what we can do so that it doesn't happen again, or what we can do so it goes differently next time, and working together with the people in our lives, the children in our lives, so that we can develop solutions together that are useful and meaningful for everyone who's involved. And continuing that experience of reflecting on what we learn and putting together the information that we need in a way that we can understand that experience. And again, even with children, to keep a journal. And it doesn't necessarily have to be anything deep. It may just be a couple sentences a day or something, but to give some space so that it becomes a habit and something that is repeatable over time. So next up, we have Principle 5, use and value renewable resources and services. And I don't know where the phrase originated, but during a PDC I taught with my teaching partner, Alexis Campbell, she kept looping back to this phrase, biology over technology, which is one direction this principle points us, because many, though not all, of our biotic resources are renewable. And so when looking at our garden, like the biggest benefit we can have is in growing soil fertility through things like cover crops and compost and nitrogen fixing plants, rather than buying in bulk fertilizer from the lawn and garden center. Similarly, the land is the best place for us to store resources. And it's often the least, though it may take more time. And so depending on our situation, we may need to bring in rain barrels or build a cistern. Building soil fertility and building the soil may take more time, but is the least expensive option in more or less every case that I've encountered on creating a space to store resources, whether that's water, building the fertility so that plants can draw from it later, and so on. Similarly, creating diversity and inviting in pollinators so that plants are pollinated for us. When it comes to making any preparations, like if we want to do some kind of a foliar feeder or a specific compost mix for one of our plants or something like that, looking for ways to create them on site from local materials. And, in that process, again, if we're looking at what we need, what nutrients we want to build, what the specific requirements are for a given plant, then that may lead us to grow something in order to fill that niche within our garden or landscape so that we can create a preparation from supplies on site and to continue to grow that diversity in our landscape. And if you're interested in some of the different preparations and things that you might create for your garden, one of my favorite books and was just an awesome interview was Nigel Palmer and his book, The Regenerative Grower's Guide to Garden Amendments. I don't have that at the moment, but yeah, if you search for that in the Permaculture podcast, it should come up. The book itself is available from Chelsea Green, but he just provides this great DIY approach to creating all of these amazing different foliar sprays, tincture, liquid tinctures, liquid fertilizers, and all kinds of stuff for that broaden the horizon of what we can use in our garden that come from the resources on site. Similarly, I think it's Jadam, Jadam, is a series of books that come from the Korean natural farming movement that I've heard good things about. My understanding is that that's where Nigel pulled a lot of his initial inspiration from. And yeah, apparently are really good for a lot of this as well if you want to find more resources for these kinds of techniques. And, as we look at doing more of this in the landscape on site, if we, move to no dig approaches and a judicious use of mulch, we can change the relationship we have with our tools, perhaps moving away from manufactured trowels to a dibbler or digging stick that we make from materials in our environment. In our communities, I think about how they represent an ever-moving resource that ebbs and flows and brings in new knowledge as our neighbors change, and getting to know people around us and finding out what they know. What kind of information and ideas do they have that they can share with us? Working together, in our communities, we can also reduce our need for consumption. And rather than having one of everything, that we can create lending libraries, not only for things like books or maybe, a miniature food bank that people can walk by and both deposit and take food from, but also things like garden tools or maybe rarely used kitchen equipment, that we can create mutual aid associations formally or, maybe something informally with our friends, where we share lists of what resources we have available so that items can be freely traded, borrowed, or swapped. Coming together in this way, we can help one another collect our harvest and put things up in winter. I think about my All-American canner, and that's a larger kind of expensive piece of equipment, and so not everyone is necessarily going to buy one, but being able to have one within our community and, put up food using one of those and coming together for canning days and things like that. And in that process, as I say, everything that we do should involve the children in our lives. So when we're working with them, looking for activities and supplies that come from natural sources, including them in these conversations about what do we have that, one of your friends might want to borrow, something that they might want to, trade or use or something like that. And looking at ways that we can minimize the use of fossil fuels. So maybe we talk about only making family trips once a week because that's when we go out to, do our grocery shopping or something like that if our farmer's market isn't readily available. If we live in a walkable community, making sure that we make that transition to moving on foot and looking at the local, that rather than going to somewhere else in order to have the fun that we want to or do what we're interested in, that it takes place in our local environment, and provides that opportunity to also get to know that space a lot better and integrate ourselves into our community. And as we do so, reducing the packaging that comes into our life, looking for ways that eliminate or minimize the use of plastic, to ask children when they want something if there's another option, and if that other option might be something that comes in from a more renewable source, and again include them in that decision-making process. And then our final principle for today is number 6: produce no waste. And even though I just mentioned that idea of going elsewhere in our lives if we are traveling or doing something, this principle is thinking about that idea that there is nowhere else, that everything that we do on this planet impacts our home. And this one really came home for me because growing up as a kid in the 80s and a child of the 90s, I always thought that, we would have a moon base or something like that by the time that I was an adult, by the year 2000. But we haven't even been back to the moon. And for all the science fiction that I've read and all of these other things that have really inspired me to care about the world and people and engage in practices like permaculture because of what they do for us and this place we call home, we haven't been on the moon in my lifetime. The last moon landing was years before I was born. And so a lot of this idea, we see this in the recent news about people going into space. Mars as it is nowhere near as hospitable as the home we currently have. And so, thinking about the ways that we reduce our impact on our home and considering things like Bill Mollison's principle about everything gardens and how we can use, create, and dispose of and all what comes into our lives in a way that reduces our waste to as little as possible with the goal of working towards no waste. And, there's that idea of reduce, reuse, recycle as the 3 R's. For a while, you may have heard of the idea of the 5 R's that include refuse, reduce, reuse, repair, and recycle. But I've recently included in this the idea of the 6 R's, that when we're looking for ways that we can produce no waste, that we're trying to find ways first to refuse it. Because if we refuse to bring something into our lives or create waste, then it's never created in the first place. Then doing everything we can to reduce it. And, again, minimize the waste that comes in. Finding ways to reuse things so that they are not single use and last a long time. Finding ways to repair items so that we can, again, continue to make use of them. Looking for items that are easier to repair, which I'll touch on a bit more here in a minute. And recover was one that was interesting to me because this idea of recovery, as I ran across it, was that it's about trying to recover the energy that is embodied in something and reduce the loss of that energy as much as possible. And so conversations like the one that I had with the architect Bob Tice about how there's, beautiful pieces of land that don't need us. And so taking the time to restore properties that already exist is a better use of that embodied energy. If a building has to be torn down, doing that demolition in such a way that the resources that are there can be recouped and recovered. Similarly, I look at our compost might be considered a part of this recovery process because it's about bringing those resources presented by the plants in our garden, putting them back into reuse and recovering what went into their growth and the minerals that they extracted. And then finally, recycling as much as we absolutely can. I know that there are all kinds of problems with recycling, and that I've read articles that more energy is spent on recycling than working with virgin materials, and some stuff that conflicts with that. So, continuing to do the best that we can, recycle things however we can, through the right kind of programs. And that's where I also think about reuse and recycling in the items that we bring into our lives. And if you're so inclined to do so, building a computer and being able to pass it on to someone else. When we buy things, making the choices to make the decisions about things that are repairable. In our landscape, when we're growing, to plant only what we need, to compost everything that's left over from our garden every year, to have ways to store our harvest through canning, drying, fermenting, salting, whatever methods come together, to share any excess that we create. Going back to the other principles, reflecting on what it is that we're growing, why a huge amount of it may have come into our lives, and being able to share that or reduce the harvest for next year, returning as much as we can to the soil. Um, you know, Related to Principle 5, if we can't create a tool from the easy to work materials on hand, to only place in our shed those that are easy to repair and with, or easy to repair and maintain with simple supplies and other hand tools. For me, I think about how something is assembled when I look at it and I'm considering buying it, and wondering, can I myself, with the skills that I have right now, actually maintain that item? And so I think about things like, your those big two-handled loppers, or if you have pruning shears or something like that, those blades are held together with a nut and a screw rather than a rivet, because I don't have riveting tools. And with a couple of wrenches, I can loosen those, take them apart, and sharpen those blades. When I'm looking for hoes or shovels, I prefer something that has kind of a large socket that it would be easy for me to just kind of like whack together a handle from with like an axe or maybe a draw knife. And ideally held together again with like a bolt and a nut, rather than some kind of a pin that goes through there. And that even though I might be able to come up with a solution from the supplies that I have on hand, it's ideal if all of those come with that product when I bring it into my life. And if you'd like to see some examples of the tools that come to mind when I think about this, if you search for Rebel Garden Tools, you'll see a lot of what I mean in these kinds of design elements. They're designed by my friends and past guests of the show, Ben Weiss and Wilson Alvarez, around their ideas of, landscape and ecosystem restoration. And no surprise, as they're permaculture practitioners, these ideas of tools that will last a long time is part of their thinking. Heavy duty handles and easy to repair equipment all kind of go into this. And they also, again, have those kind of like simple handles with a large socket that use a nut and bolt to attach them. Or even in some cases, their tools are completely made out of metal. So the only thing that they're going to need is, maintenance. They're unlikely to ever break. But I mentioned Rebel Garden Tools because they're the ones who are making the kinds of tools that I look for. But they're not the only ones. There are plenty of other companies making amazing tools that kind of fit this idea of easy to maintain and repair. Hey, Felipe, thanks for joining me here for a bit. Probably got about another 10 or 15 minutes maybe in this live stream. So if any questions come up or anything, let me know. But yeah, I'm real happy to be releasing new episodes again. And the next two will be the two out here at the end of August, and then the first week of July will be some conversations that were recorded by my friend Dan Palmer with David Holmgren, a two-part interview that I'll be releasing with kind of my normal opening and ending commentary on it about their discussion. Really happy to be able to share what Dan's doing. He and I have talked quite a bit over the years, and are really happy to be colleagues who are looking at completely different perspectives on permaculture. He's really been diving in the last couple of years on what design really looks like and what comes from that, and what we can do to really sharpen our work as designers, while I've been taking much more of an approach about that idea of how this work is centered inside of us. And so what can we do to kind of like draw that out and build ourselves up and our knowledge and our ideas in meaningful ways. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. But yeah, when it comes to tools and things like that, there's this phrase that my friend Jason Godesky and I have kind of tossed around, is that we want houses that need to be continually rebuilt with tools that last generations. And so that these pieces that are really vital to us really can become heirlooms. The tools that we use regularly, whatever those may be, are things that we pass on to those who come after us. But that the trappings of civilization are designed and built from materials that also need maintenance in such a way that will disappear into the landscape if we leave them or abandon them. So that rather than having civilization be these kind of like monoliths that exist for, hundreds or thousands of years, that the natural world can quickly and easily reclaim it. And that's one of the things that I think about quite a bit, um, about if I were to build my own home. Um, and yeah, just how all of that kind of comes together within the permaculture mindset about creating these systems that are from natural resources and that can be used by resources other than humans through the years. So, yeah. And all the different ways that we do that. And like, I've always been fascinated by an earth ship, but looking at the tires that are there, it's a great reuse, but it doesn't quite fit that goal of those things kind of like disappearing over time. Um, but yeah, also exploring that as we live in a culture and a civilization that is so much one use and disposable, it can be hard to find products that are designed to be repaired or last a long time or made even within our own country. And so if we can't find those kinds of things, what are the other ways that we can move away from those uses of resources and instead, um, remove things from the waste stream by doing things like buying used? Um, if we can't find something that fits some of these other goals. And as we do this, to look at the ways in our community that we can advocate for these kinds of decisions, that putting together community mulch or composting programs, if there aren't any, allowing for things like backyard gardens and compost bins, because there are some places where those aren't allowed because there are concerns about pests and vermin. As we bring these kinds of elements into our community, the ways that we then can help spread this information by hosting skill shares and showing people how to repair tools and all the different skills that go into living like a permaculture lifestyle. And, if you find something that works really well, letting people know. Leave a comment in a video like this, send me a message or something like that, so that we can know where all of these items are available and be able to move away from like the yard and garden store that are producing the kinds of tools that last, a couple of seasons. Or if you accidentally leave them out in the rain, they may not even last that long. And when we think about future generations and the impacts that we can have with them, showing them the ways that we can reuse items, what, where, and how to recycle. One of the most valuable skills I think I've ever had is just learning how to sew a button back on. Teaching some of that ability to be self-reliant, but also, community responsible in that way. And as we continue to walk through that process with them, looking for products that come from recycled materials and talking about why we use those items every day and source things that are closer to our ethics and the way all that ties together, and talking about why we make these choices and the impacts that these decisions can have. And I find that in doing so, like talking about these different pieces really helps to tie together the web of interconnected relationships that we have, that we get a better understanding and early knowledge of how many steps there are to get food from the field to our table, and all the different people who are connected in that chain and that process, all the different relationships that are involved, and that it's not just like a grocery store to plate or an A, B, or C. We have a lot of different people who make that work. We have a lot of different systems and all that make that happen in the garden, having those conversations about pollinators and the difference between, self-pollinating plants and yeah, just continuing to deepen their understanding of just how all of this is related and interrelated, and how, as much as we might want to, none of us really stands on our own. And that, I think about my grandfather, that classic idea of the rugged um, American farmer. And, he might have been able to make some repairs to some of his equipment, but if his plow broke, he was calling in somebody to weld that back together. He could do a lot of his regular maintenance, but if something seized in his engine, he was calling somebody in to do that. And yeah, I think being aware of all of the relationships that are involved is just really helpful. And that I think in many ways we've kind of traded capital and our ability to earn money for those relationships. And so it's our ability to pay for people to do these things has like disconnected from a sense of community, and created this, reinforced that myth of independence, or that we can be independent. And most of the examples that I can think of, we're just not. There are a handful of folks who may be able to do something completely on their own in the middle of nowhere, hunting and foraging, but that's not the case for the majority of us. And that's one of the things that I think that we need to recognize as permaculture practitioners and talk about in our work, is the way that all of this ties together. And how, we're not necessarily individuals in many ways, but we are individual, and that who we are and our life experience is rooted into our community experiences. Anyway, kind of a sideline there. It's something that I've been reading into and having some conversations about, is how much modern society has kind of broken down our relationships and created this disconnect, not only from the natural world, but also from the earth. And that I think rebuilding many of those relationships and understanding them they're just super important, and how we all build up. So let me hop over here to the chat. Felipe, it looks like you've got some more. Okay. Yeah. What did you think about the talking about the most recent interview, my conversation with Hannah Ekberg about Abundant Earth Foundation? You listened to that this morning. Going to write to her about a project you're working on with the Guarani indigenous people related to ecological restoration with agroforestry and syntropic agriculture in Atlantic rainforest. Oh, that's pretty awesome. Yeah, rainforest is one of those ecosystems that I don't have a lot of personal understanding of. So that's pretty cool. And being able to tie in indigenous folks and everything else, that's pretty awesome. Yeah, hopefully that will be helpful to you when you reach out to her. Let me know if anything happens that you don't hear back. I do know that they're busy and working on some new rounds of fundraising and some other pieces, and all the different projects that they're pulling together. But yeah, if you reach out to Abundant Earth and don't hear back for a while, let me know, and I'll feel free to see if I can get in touch or find anything. Plus, I'd love to learn more about that project. If you want to copy me on it, send it my way. Yeah, I'm always interested in what folks are doing. Because similarly, it's the more that I know about what's going on in the world, the more that I can connect people with projects and resources, and we can, dig in deeper to just, what everybody's doing, and find ways that we can work together to grow and build all of our work and reach more people and have a deeper impact. And so, if there's anything that you ever want to talk with me directly about, if you're during this conversation, as this comes together, feel free to drop me a message about it. Leave a comment in this video. You can also get in touch with me directly about any of the principles or anything that I brought up today, or anything else that you're working on when it comes to your permaculture journey. Feel free to call or text me. I don't think this number should ever change for a while, so if you're even watching this a year or two down the road, my phone number is 717-827-6266. As I say, you can text me to that, and I will get back to you. So Yeah, as always, you can email me, show@thepermaculturepodcast.com. That's available all the time. I try to be in my email twice a week, so if you send me something and it takes me a week or two to get back to you, I apologize about that, but I also try to find, depending on what your question is, do some research and dig into finding some resources and things like that. And of course, you can also always send me a letter or drop something in the mail. My address is Scott Mann, 210 East Fairfax Street, number 300, Falls Church, Virginia, 22046. I love letters, and I have got some cool postcards that I send to folks when I get things from them. So if you ever want to drop something in wherever you are in the world, I really love letters. Um, or yeah, if you have pictures of a project or something, those are great to see. Um, I'm gonna Felipe. I'm gonna dive in if you're still with me. If you want to talk about fundraising a little bit, I will stay on the live stream and we can continue that if you want to drop any questions in. I'm gonna round out some of my social media stuff here real quick, and then we can continue that if you'd like. Um, but yeah, if you're interested in getting in touch, I'm also available on Twitter, Permaculture Pod, usually every day for at least a couple minutes. Same with Instagram, checking in and seeing what pictures people have. Feel free to drop me messages there if those are places where you communicate and enjoy hanging out. Also, for the show, there's the Patreon community at patreon.com/permaculturepodcast. I'm posting weekly updates, announcements about live streams like this, putting in requests for questions and topics for the live streams. And that's really been a place where I'm diving into conversations with folks about, um, everything that's going on behind the scenes and where the show can go, especially with returning to production. There is a new episode in the feed for the show. As I mentioned, the conversation with Hannah Eckberg, and now I'm back to full-time production and aiming for 45 episodes in the next year. 24 at least of these live streams, though with how they've been going, they may be more frequent. But those are my goals for this year. And then, I have the annual summer to fall fundraiser, seeing how that will go. And, depending on what's raised through that, that kind of determines what the rest of the year is going to look like. Um, yeah, so, but as I say, you can find out about that and a lot more at Patreon, within the Patreon for the podcast. Yeah. So, like I say, feel free in any of those ways to drop me a message. Um, but Felipe, are you still with me? And are you in a place that you want to continue that conversation about fundraising? Also, the next live stream, I'll pop this up real quick. The next live stream is going to be on Tuesday, July 24th at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. GMT. I don't have a topic for that yet because I schedule as much of these as I can just because I've been enjoying them lately, getting to have conversations like this. But yeah, I'll be doing another one of those, as I say, in a couple of days. But yeah, if you have any questions you want to drop into the chat, I'll stick around for a couple of minutes and we can continue this. Okay, Felipe, looks like you're dropping out of here. That's perfect. Yeah, feel free to send me an email, and I'm happy to share everything that I've learned over the years. I've done some organizational development and management stuff, grant writing, fundraising. I've done all, my own fundraising for the show for years. So yeah, feel free to drop me a line. Janice. Hey, Janice, I'm not sure if I've seen you with us before, but thanks for coming in. I hope the sourdough muffins are delicious. Oh yes, you say that you haven't attended one before. Yeah, these I'm just throwing these out there as often as I can. Um, Trying to do one once a week, in one way or another, hopping around. Overall, trying to one during the week and then one during the weekend with one a week. With the show back in full production, I may back off that a little. Um, but yeah, just continuing to do this kind of stuff so we can have conversations like this. So, and you say you study with Scott Pittman. That's awesome. I was in touch with Scott a number of years ago, and I'm really happy, with the work that he's done with Permaculture Institute and the people who have come now. As I understand, he's still doing some work but I stepped back. I haven't checked in on him in a little while. I should. But yeah, no, that's cool. And yeah, as I said, there's more podcasts coming. So Janice, if there's anybody you want to hear on the show in an interview, if you or anybody else who's listening have something that you want to suggest for a conversation, I'm really happy to hear about that. The next month or so is more or less recorded and in the can. I just have some things to finalize and finish up. Yeah. So, and then I need to look at my schedule. I think the next live stream about these principles will be probably 2 or 3 weeks to the middle of August. Um, and then, yeah, as summer comes to a close, I'm hanging out with my kids some, and they're going to be down for the first full week in August. Yeah, just getting some time to hang out and enjoy that. So, yeah, yeah, it should be fun. So, yeah, if nobody has any other questions or anything they want to drop in the chat, thank you all so much for joining me. As I say, another one of these will be here in a few days. And yeah, thank you all for being a part of this show now for almost 11 years, for all the suggestions you've given, for all of your thoughts on what I'm doing right, letting me know where I can improve, and just what would increase your enjoyment of the Permaculture podcast in all this time. So yeah, thank you all. And as I say, join me here this upcoming Tuesday for the next live stream. Until then, and the next episode, as always, take care of yourself, the earth, and each other. And I will see you all again soon.